Welcome back to another Unreal Engine 4 tutorial, and in today's episode we will be interacting with our foliage. So if you look down, as you can see, I'm hitting the E key on my keyboard and I'm removing these grass instances, which are just a regular foliage painted with a foliage tool. So there we go, we are clearing this space off, but this is also a foliage painted with a foliage tool, which we can change into actors whenever we interact with those. So as you can see, I can no longer overlap this, and that is because it got replaced with an actual tree actor. Obviously, you can block, enable the collision by default as well. You don't have to have this overlap. This is just for the tutorial purposes so that you can see whenever it is getting replaced, because whenever we interact with it, we see no difference because the actor is getting spawned in the same location with the same rotation and all that stuff. So let's go ahead and let's get started. So unfortunately, I don't know how to enable collision for the foliage that we created in the previous video. If you know how to enable collision on this type of foliage, let me know down in the comment section below so that others know that as well. But I do know how to enable collision for the foliage that is painted with the tool. So we're gonna work on that one. So I have some grass painted and I have some trees. Now I left these trees so that we can overlap them, so that we can see whenever they are getting replaced with the actor, but obviously you can enable collisions on these ones as well. So let me real quick show you some of the collision settings that are important. Now for the grass, so select your foliage, specific foliage type, scroll down till you find the instance settings, and then we have the collision preset. Change that to be custom. I'm gonna ignore everything except for the visibility trace channel, because that's the channel that I'm going to be using to interact with my foliage, and also make sure that the collision enabled is set to query only, or at least collision fully enabled. That is if you want it to have a proper collision. Now with the trees, everything is the same, but if you want to block everything, then make sure you enable the collision enabled, and also you block all if you want to your character not to be able to walk through the tree. But for the demonstration purposes, I'm gonna leave the settings similar to what I have for the grass. Now of course make sure to block the visibility trace channel regardless. Now what we need to do is go ahead and open up our third-person character and start working on the functionality. Now over here I'm going to keep this very simple. I'm going to have a keyboard E key event. Obviously you can do this on any single one of them, and I'm going to do a basic sphere trace by channel. I'm going to use a sphere because it will have a bigger hit radius, so it's going to be a little bit easier to hit the instances. I'm going to set the radius to something like 40, and let's go ahead and let's set up the start and end points. Now we can grab our follow camera and get its world location and use that as a start position. So it's going to shoot a sphere from the camera, and we want to shoot it forward, so we need the follow camera's forward vector. And then for the forward vector, we want to multiply this. Now in Unreal Engine 4, you can select multiply with float or integer or another vector. In Unreal Engine 5, there is just simply a multiply node. So I'm going to have to go ahead and create ourselves a variable, which is going to be called trace distance. And I'm going to make this into a float. So if you're doing this in Unreal Engine 4, make sure you multiply the vector with a float, or if you're using an integer, make sure you multiply the vector with an integer. Now in Unreal Engine 5, I can just grab this, plug it over here, and it's instantly going to convert this. Now we need to provide the distance, so make sure you select your trace distance, compile it, and then you can provide the value. I'm going to set this to be like 1000, so my trace is going to shoot 1000 units forward. Now, the next thing that we need to do is add both of these vectors together. So the world location plus the forward vector times the distance. And that's going to be our end trace. Now, for the trace channel, like I said, I'm using a visibility. Obviously, you can set up a custom one and use that one instead. And for now, I'm also going to enable the draw debug type for duration so that I can see where the line trace is actually shooting, well, the sphere trace, just in case maybe if some of the positions are off, it's a good tool to see what's going on. Then from here, we can do a if branch check. Then let's break the hit result, and then if this is true, that means that we have hit something, and if we have hit something, then we want to cast to the instanced foliage instanced static mesh component. and the object reference needs to be the hit component, because we are casting directly to the component and we are skipping the actor itself, because we don't need to cast to the actor. All we need is this component. Now from here, as the foliage instance component, we want to remove the instance, and then the instance index is going to be our hit item, and it's going to tell us which instance we have hit. So now whenever we press play, and if we spam the E key, you will see that I should have changed it to a different type. I changed this to a for duration, for 1 frame. I wanted to set this for duration so it's a little bit better visible. There we go. So you can see when it turns green with the red dot, that means that it has hit something, and it is going to be removing these instances. Now if we walk up to the trees, you can see with the trees it's a little bit easier to see. We are removing these trees whenever we hit the E key. There we go. So that's cool. All nice and good. Now let's go ahead and let's make sure that maybe we can also chop these trees, and for that I'm going to replace the foliage instance with an actor for a couple of seconds. Obviously if it gets cut down, then it's not going to come back, but if we don't cut it down, we can basically replace it back as a foliage instance. Now for that we're going to need an actor. So I have mine already created. So in the content browser, I have a tree actor, which is just a regular static mesh actor type. So as you can see, all it has is just one mesh, and it is blocking everything so that we can't really walk through this. And that's basically all that I have for this as of right now. So let's go back to our third person character, and over here let's go ahead and let's create some bit of functionality. So I'm going to create ourselves a new function, and I'm going to call this check mesh, so that we know which instance we have hit, because I want to keep on destroying the grass whenever we interact with it, but with the tree I want to replace it with an actor, so that the actor has some logic, some health, and so that we can actually chop it down basically. So for this we need a single input, which is going to be, I'm going to call this mesh, and the type needs to be a static mesh, because we are going to compare the static meshes. Now for this we need some kind of a database which will tell us what to do with which instance. So I'm going to go ahead and create ourselves a new variable, and I'm going to call this foliage meshes, and I'm going to make this into a static mesh type, static mesh, and this needs to be an array of them. There we go. So whenever we have this, we can bring it in, we can get this, and we can do a loop for each with a break, so that whenever we find the correct mesh, so that we would stop the loop. Right now I will have only 2 instances, so it's going to be just fine, but if we have a lot of them, well then probably it's better if we stop the loop early. So I'm going to go ahead and add those 2 entries to the foliage meshes array. And so the first one is the grass. I'm using the grass 1 mesh, and then I have the tree, which is also the 301 mesh. There we go. So from here, what we want to do is we want to grab the arrays element, and we want to check if that is equal to the mesh that we are providing. Now then we can do an if to check if that is true or false. And then if that is true, well then we need a couple of local variables. The first one is local found, which is a boolean and a single variable. So we can set that whenever it's true, we can set that to be true. And then also we need another variable which is going to tell us the index. So we want to have the local index, and this one is an integer, and we can set that one up as well. And then the local index is the index from the array. And whenever we have done all of this, we can go ahead and break our loop. There we go. So we have broken the loop. Now whenever we have done our loop from the completion, we can then just simply return, and we can return all the values that we set up over here. So we can return the found and the index. Here we go. So I'm just going to plug those in like this. Here we go. And I'm going to real quick just rename them to just local, without the local and without the 1. There we go. So we have those set up. Nice. There we go. So a basic function. Let's go back to our event graph, and now instead of just destroying something So before we actually remove something, let's go ahead and let's run our check mesh. Let's do that first. I'm going to disconnect it for now. But we also need, from the static mesh component, we need to get the actual static mesh itself so that we can provide this to the function. There we go. So now it's going to go through the possibilities and it's going to see which one it is. So on the found, let's do an if to see if it actually was able to find that mesh, because maybe we are interacting with a different foliage mesh which we don't want to do anything with. And then if this is true, that means we found the correct one, at least one of the ones that is in our database over here. So we can do a switch on our index because, well, I'm going to do different things for different foliages. So I have two of those. So I'm going to add two entries, 0 and 1. So the 0 is our grass and 1 is our tree. Now, if it is our grass, then I'm just going to run the remove instance. So it's just simply going to destroy that grass. But if that is our tree, well, then we want to do something different. I'm going to real quick reroute the static mesh component because we're going to need that one as well for the other actor also. So from the 1, if that is a tree, we are going to spawn our actor. So I'm going to spawn actor from class and we are going to spawn our tree. There we go. Now we need to provide this a spawn transform, and we can get that from our static mesh component. So from here, I'm going to get the instance transform. So it's going to tell me that one specific instance's transform, and we can plug that into the spawn actor from class. Now we need to provide this an index. So I'm going to use the same one as I use for the remove instance. So we can plug that in. So that is our hit item. And also make sure to check the world space so that we are getting the transform from the world space, not the relative one from the component, because we need to place it in the exact same rotation and location in the world space. And then once we have done that, after we spawn it, we can go ahead and remove that instance because it's no longer needed basically at this point, because, well, now we have this actor which is going to do all the tasks that we need it to do. So let's go ahead and hit play. So look real quick, let me disable this so there's not a lot of lines so we can see this a little bit better. So now for the grass, if we spam the E key a lot, you will see that the grass is again getting removed just like it was before. So that seems to work just fine. Now with the trees, we can walk through those, but if we interact with it, we can no longer walk through this because that one, these instances are getting replaced with an actor. Now, but here is a small downside to this. At this point, well, these are the instances of the foliage are removed, but these are actors, and it's not a good idea to have some useless actors somewhere in the world if, well, we just hit it maybe once, we start interacting with it, and we don't do anything afterwards. So let's go ahead and let's create some logic so that if the tree stays long enough, this actor, if it stays long enough in the world, it would turn back into the foliage. So in our tree, what I'm going to do is on begin play, I'm going to do a bit of a delay. Obviously, in real world example, you will want this to be a longer delay, but I'm going to set mine to only 10 seconds so that it basically spawns back a little bit quicker so we don't have to wait as long. Now, once we have done this, we again want to cast to our foliage instanced static mesh component, and we need to provide this an object. So in the variables, I'm going to add a new variable and I'm going to call this foliage comp. I'm going to make sure to set this type to be a primitive component, so it's a little bit of a kind of like a wildcard, so it's easier to provide. And also I will make sure to make this instance editable and exposed on spawn so that we can actually provide this whenever we spawn this actor. So then we can grab our foliage component and plug it into the object. So now it's going to be able to cast to this component. Then as this instance static mesh component, we want to add an instance in the world space like so. And then we can right click anywhere and get the actor location, actor transform better, actor transform. And this one is going to return us the location, rotation, and scale of this specific actor in the world space. And then we can plug it over here and it's going to spawn a new foliage instance in the same location as our actor. And then whenever we have done that, let's make sure that we actually destroy this actor so that the tree would disappear. So the tree actor would disappear and the foliage would be in its place. There we go. So one last thing, we actually need to provide this foliage component value, and we can do that whenever we spawn our tree. So mine already popped up. If yours doesn't, go ahead, right click this node and click refresh nodes, and then this one is going to appear, and you can plug that into the foliage static mesh component like so. So now we can walk up to this, and you will see I can walk through this. If I interact with it, I can no longer do that, and after 10 seconds again I'm going to be able to walk through that because it is going to replace it back with a foliage instead of being an actor. There we go. So obviously you can use this same example in many different applications. You don't have to do this on keyboard key E. You can do this like on an overlap event. Whenever your axe hits the tree for the first time, then it can replace the foliage instance with an actual actor, and that probably is going to be way better than the E key event, but the logic is exactly the same. All you need is these nodes right here, and then whenever you overlap with your axe or something, then you can provide this info from the hit result from the overlap event. So that's going to be it for this video. This is very useful. This is very good thing to have, very good thing to know, because if you have a lot of trees, obviously it is way better to have them as foliage rather than just placing the actual actors in the world, because foliage will take less resources than what a bunch of actors will. And also, of course, it is way easier to paint these into your level. As you can see, I have a bunch of trees, but if I'm going to place the actors down, it's going to take me a while. So yeah, thank you for watching. Make sure to subscribe if you found this useful, because I'm posting videos twice a week. And yeah, see you in the next one.